The ovaries are talking, and trust us, you'll want to hear what they have to say. Science, tech, hormones, and a whole lot of honesty. This is Talking Ovaries. Hi, welcome to Talking Ovaries. This week, we're doing part 2 of our cortisol testing using the Eli Health saliva cortisol tests, which Tanya and I have been testing for the past 6 days. I have some really good feedback on some of this. I did get my report. What did you find? Where did you get your info and what did you feel about it?
Yeah, I thought it was fun to do. It was very interesting to learn more about cortisol because honestly, I didn't know as much about cortisol. I know a lot about estrogen and progesterone and those hormones that are really associated with menopause. But I did a bit of digging into cortisol, the role of cortisol, and also because I work out and I exercise, how my tests were actually being influenced by that. And that was interesting. So yes, I also have quite a few insights, questions, and so let's get right into it.
Wonderful. As you all noticed last week, we did the test. So this is what they actually look like after you've used them. They'll have the little dots on there. And just to recap, I can't push it back, but the little piece that goes on the end, you stick it into your mouth for around 60 seconds. Something I actually did find is that I thought it had to go not all the way back, but much further back on my tongue. And I discovered that it could actually just stay on the tip of your tongue. I was doing this in the morning. I get up around 5 a.m. So mine were being done around 5:30 in the morning. I actually thought, this is going to sound very weird, but I thought I would have a problem with that because I always wake up really thirsty in the morning and I always want a drink of water. But in fact, I found I had more saliva in the morning than I did in the evening when I was doing
Ah,
my testing.
there you go.
So,
I think you're thinking about the COVID test, and you have to put it all the way up your nose, maybe, right? We have
yeah,
we have PTSD from those COVID tests.
I think so too. So you put the test in your mouth for 60 seconds. You then pull this part here so that you can see a tiny little lilac-y blue dot. And then you set the timer on the Eli Health app for 20 minutes. And you then take a picture of the panel here with the little QR code. And then it produces a result for you and tells you whether you are above, below, or within range for that time of day and gives you a graph. So I did this for 6 days. Did you have any user issues? Were you okay with that, Tanya?
I had a couple of user issues. I'm not very good with a camera, right? And holding my phone still, right? So my phone is doing this and I'm trying to line up the picture. I thought, oh, I wonder if the lighting and how much you move it, is that going to change my results? So I played around with that a little bit. I would say, out of all the times that tried, it was always the same result, except for once. Once it did give me a different result, but then I tried to go back and it went back to the original result, and then I couldn't get it back to be wrong again. So I thought that was good, but I was really nervous about the camera setting. And because I go to bed late, and the evening measurement, if you are supposed to take it at 11 p.m. or by 11 p.m., sometimes I would still be up and I'm like, oh, I gotta go take the cortisol test before I go to bed. One time my measurement was post midnight, and then it started with, well, what time did you wake up? Because it thinks it's morning. And I'm like, no, 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 it's still night. So I ended up having to discard that. I couldn't get it to reset. I had to just discard that measurement and start again the next day with a morning measurement. So there's a couple of things that I think they need to tweak as far as the user experience. But other than that, it was pretty straightforward, I think.
I'm the complete opposite of you. I wake up at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
And
Which
I'm
is why
going
we're
to.
good test samples because we're
We
the
we
opposite.
are we
Yes.
are we show the different sides of using these kinds of tests. The only other thing I sort of think about is this is just half of my test, but this is what I'm remained. I know you disposed of yours, but I don't see anything on these about them being recyclable plastic. So they are single-use plastic. It's something that is really important to me. So I have a whole other container of the tests, and I don't want to just throw them in the garbage. So I was thinking about that a little bit too. I'm not sure what Eli Health will do with that. The other thing I wanted to look at was the app itself and how easy it was to use and what it provided for me as a user. And I have to say, I was at times a little confused about the information that it was providing. So it would say that my tests in the morning were within range. Nearly every day, my tests were very high in the evenings and then was within range in the mornings. Tuesday morning, when I didn't sleep very well the night before and therefore had difficulty waking up. And so I think my cortisol hadn't kicked in the morning in order to wake me up, which is exactly what happens for all of us, which means that sometimes if you're waking up at 4 a.m., it means your cortisol is kicking in too early. And I think that's actually what happens for me. I really was looking for the app to provide me more information about cortisol itself and about what influences it and what doesn't. And so when there was an issue, so for example, in the evenings when my cortisol was high, it said to me that I needed to exercise or I needed to do some form of exercise or I needed to reduce my stress during the day. And then didn't really give me any information about either how to do that or resources to go to in order to get more information about that. And I understand that apps have a limitation on the fact that they can't provide medical advice. But at least then providing me with a link of where I could go,
Yeah.
I found that actually quite disappointing. And this morning I downloaded the report that came with it. And although it gave me my above and below range, it didn't give me any other information. The final thing I wanted to say was it didn't say, you know what, your cortisol levels are actually really high at the end of the day. You might want to discuss this with a healthcare professional. And
Hmm.
it didn't advise that either.
Yeah.
And so I found it quite limited. It's really just a test.
It's funny that you said your cortisol was high at night because my cortisol was also high at night, except for one, the last test I took last night, I was in range and I was like, yes, I felt very validated that the last day I had like a proper high morning, low cortisol, and I was optimal. I liked being labeled as being optimal. But there's so many things that impact cortisol. You have to make sure that you have the right context. So now from a menopause context, for example, because I was doing some research, so as your estrogen gets lower, your cortisol naturally goes higher, right? So women in menopause will have likely a more flattened curve as opposed to the high morning and low evening. Also, what I found was a correlation with mine. So I found it interesting that it told you to exercise if your evening cortisol was high, because in my case, if I did my workout, let's say around 5 p.m., 5, 6 p.m., and then I took my test before 11, my cortisol was always high. And if I did my workout earlier in the day, so let's say noon or 1 o'clock. So yesterday I did my workout at 1 p.m. and now my cortisol was in the range. So I find it interesting. They were suggesting maybe it was the opposite. And I don't know. And maybe my source is wrong. I'm not saying my source is correct. I found that interesting. And there's so many other things, right? The fact that menopause is a factor, how much you exercise is a factor. Those things should be mentioned, I think. I recognize that they can't diagnose you, and I respect that, but at least having the information that these are all the things that can affect cortisol. And if you don't have the traditional morning peak, nighttime low, perhaps you'd like to go and discuss it more with your doctor. I think that would have been a good thing. I read about the technology. I don't know if you've read about the technology and how it works. I mean, it's more or less like a pregnancy test, right? So, I mean,
Mm.
it kind of looks like a pregnancy test. It feels like a pregnancy test for those of us who have done pregnancy tests. So the technology is just, it's similar, except that it looks for the cortisol hormone, which is fine. But pregnancy is more on off. Yes, it's there, right? So this is trying to measure how much cortisol there is. And the reason you take a picture, right, is because it's analyzing the color of the lines to determine how much cortisol there is. So it analyzes the how dark and how light the line is to determine how much cortisol there is. I was concerned about how accurate it is. That's why it just gives you that range, plus or minus 2, I think it was micrograms per milliliter of cortisol. So it's not really a medical level device. It's more where you're looking for trends. Is your cortisol high, low? Do you have the right curve? And
Mhm.
that in its own, I feel it can be an interesting addition to analyze your health if you can afford it.
They are marketing it as a wellness tool, not a diagnostic
Yeah.
tool, which I think is fair enough. But I think if you are marketing something as a wellness tool and you are an individual who is willing to pay the cost, I was left with an overwhelming feeling of so what? I got the above, below, or within range. So what? What do I do with it next? And then one of my concerns was if my cortisol level on both the morning and evening tests had come back as very high, so outside of the range, both ends of the day for all of those tests, then what do I do with that next? There wasn't any kind of advice as to what you can do with this next. And that is a big concern that I have about wellness tools in general
Yeah.
in the space that we're currently in is they can't diagnose. This isn't a diagnostic tool and they're not marketing it as that. So I think that's fair enough. But if it's a wellness tool, when would they actually say on the app, you know what? All of your tests have been really high. This is something you should speak to your healthcare provider about. Or if they don't do that, is providing resources that can assist to resolve some of the issues around some of this. I felt that that was a bit of a gap in terms of the app itself and the report. And I've received reports from apps before your own, including for Bastet Rising, and it provided much more information for me to be able to talk to my physician about it. So this morning, when I looked at the report, I thought, okay, if I printed this off or if I took this to my GP and said, look, I'm concerned because my cortisol levels are high, I'm not sure what we would do about that.
I don't even know that a GP would know what to do about high
No.
cortisol levels because it's a metabolic hormone. Maybe with more education, then this could be a way to see if you're insulin resistant because I think there is a link. I think they just need to add a bit more on the educational front. I do agree with you, but I think that's easily fixed. So hopefully Eli is listening. I think they could close that gap pretty easily. But at the same time, I think it's an evolving tool. I
Mm.
think it's something that we need to encourage our fellow Canadians to support this Canadian company. They're being pioneers in
Mhm.
this space. And if you are looking to support a Canadian company and you have the funds to do that, then just buy their product, use it, give them feedback like we are right now, and they
Mm.
will pivot. They want to know what their customers think, obviously. And I know they do because when I got these tests, it was part of their beta, and I got many, many emails asking me for feedback. I just didn't because I hadn't tried it yet. I think it's very important to support them, give them the feedback, and they will improve. And
Yes.
that's how things get better. And I think cortisol could be an interesting tool once we know more, and perhaps the technology can become a little bit more accurate. I think it's still a little bit too vague, but it's again, these things have to evolve over time.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think this can be part of an overall sort of wellness package. I think we talk about that a lot in terms of, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone affect so many different parts of our body, our system. We talk about system health. And Eli Health, if you are listening, one piece of feedback I have for you. This little area here where the circle is normally in here, this is really sharp, really, really sharp plastic. one day I was using this and I'd got lotion on my hands and I went to pull it down and my finger got caught on this part here and I actually cut my finger on the plastic.
Ooh.
So I would say, can we kind of soften those edges a little bit? I found it on all of them, and after that, I was really cautious when using this. So if we can soften those little edges of the plastic, then that would be
And it's a
great.
bit flimsy in that area, right? So because you have to pull on
Yeah.
it, right? So yeah.
Yeah, and I was kind of afraid that I was going to pull the whole thing out. And this little dot, if your sight was a little bit compromised, and this is first thing in the morning, I haven't got my glasses on, you're not going to be able to see.
Yeah,
But
you
there's
can't even see it there on the camera. It's very light. I need to be dark, like a black dot or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. Is I understand that this is a part of their marketing and branding colors, but if we can make that dot really dark so that
A
you
dark purple or put a line around it so you can see it. Yeah.
I'm really pleased that we gave it a go. What I will do with my test results, I don't know, but I will be doing some more reading about those high cortisol levels in the evening. But to be honest, I know why they're high. I know why.
Why? Why are they high?
Just a really, a really stressful week for me to do this. We also had heavy snowfall warning and heavy snow in Calgary. We went down to -34 at one point, so I didn't get my daily walks. And normally I walk straight after work, which is my time for relaxing and moving, and I find it really beneficial. And I haven't been able to do that this week. And I think that it really helped me to clarify that potentially my cortisol levels might be high because I had a really high stress week. I had a lot on. I wasn't able to move as much as I would normally have moved. So therefore I'm feeling a little sluggish, and that might be why my cortisol levels are higher.
Yeah, it would be nice to have more tests to run those experiments, right? Because like even from my side, with the experiments being, it looks like it's related to when I do my workouts, but I would really like to have had a few more tests to actually try that out, so to see a clear correlation. Right now, I have like one data point that kind of suggests that, but it would be nice to be able to try a few different things to say, okay, is it really related to this or not?
So, Tanya, I think you're right. I would actually like to do more testing to see how my evening walks, usually 40 minutes to an hour, would improve my cortisol levels. So I would find that very interesting because I also find, slight aside, but then when I take my blood pressure, because as you know, we've talked about before, I have high blood pressure, that my blood pressure goes down after I exercise. So I would like to really see how my lifestyle is affecting those levels too. So I would be very interested in doing that if Eli Health was interested too.
Yeah. And from a menopause perspective, right? So really validating that is the line actually flatter because we are post-menopause,
Mm.
and because I take HRT. I mean, I would love to understand how HRT and when I take it, because sometimes I'm not always as consistent as I should be when I take my HRT. How does that impact cortisol? Because all these hormones are interlinked, right? And we know that. But but Eli Health also has a progesterone test and they have a testosterone test.
Mm.
Would really love to understand and try them because I take progesterone, so do you, and I
Mm.
also take testosterone. So I
Mm.
would love to see how would that impact. And there really isn't any data on testosterone for women. So it'd be
Mm.
really interesting to try the testosterone from a female perspective and a menopause perspective and see if the test pick, if it matters when I take it. All this is so important. We have to start measuring our hormones. We have to start making sure that we understand how they're related, how they impact our health. And while it's not continuous monitoring, like the Eli product, I know they market it as a continuous hormone monitoring, but it really isn't because you're doing your single time tests and then you're inferring what's happening in between, which I don't, when it comes to hormones, I don't agree with because our hormones can be all over the place.
Mm.
But it's a start, and this is how we're going to get there. So we have to continue working with these products so that they can get better, and that's how our health will evolve. So it's yeah, I'd be very interested in trying some of the other tests.
I think you're right. And it's really interesting. I was listening to a physician who was being interviewed by the International Menopause Society about progesterone. For some women, they don't feel good on it at all. I think the phrase he used was some women don't even want to be in the same room as progesterone because they feel so bad on it. And then there's also women who get those real sleep benefits and some that don't.
Yeah.
And trying to understand why that is and what goes on with that, I think is really important. But as we both talk about frequently, there is not enough research in women's health to start off with. I noticed also this week that Suncor has opened up a women's health clinic at the University of Calgary at the Foothills location and given $5 million. And it's a great start. But, you know, we do need more funding into this. So even something with what Eli Health is doing, and they're not just marketing this towards women, it is men too. But being able to understand those levels, I think will help us to advocate for ourselves, and advocating is something that I'm very passionate about.
And unfortunately, the technology that they're using is not conducive for estrogen testing. Cortisol, testosterone, and progesterone are at higher levels in your saliva than estrogen is. Because I was like, well, why is there a testosterone test and why isn't there an estrogen test? Mm-hmm. And it's at the edge of what the technology can do. So they're probably not going to have an estrogen test unless they come up with some way to update the technology. But for now, it looks like that's not the case. So we're SOL on the estrogen testing using this technology, but there's other technologies that hopefully we'll be looking at as part of our next and upcoming episodes.
Do we happen to know, Tanya, whether or not there is any competitors on the market?
There's actually quite a few, but none of them Canadian. So we're going to stick with the Canadian. Support Eli Health. That's what we say.
Okay, great. But interesting to see that other people are moving towards this level of technology and what's available for us. Before we recap then, Tanya, anything else that you have to say about cortisol testing?
I think it's a great tool to add to our toolkit to understand our health. To me, hormones are going to be the key to understanding and unlocking our longevity and health. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very excited about all these things coming up. And yes, it is a little wonky, as you know, I like to say, but it will get there, right? We have to work with it and continue to improve it. Cortisol is a hot topic. Everybody talks about the stress hormone, but it's not that simple, right? I think as you saw when we tried the test, it's not that simple. You have to understand why it's reacting the way it is, what impacts it, and how it's affecting your overall health and your metabolic health. And it's not you can't just do it from these small tests. You have to put everything into context. Mm-hmm. And for that, you will need a healthcare provider to help you do that. And I am skeptical that there are many healthcare providers who can help you do that, at least mm-hmm. not from, primary care. This is not a primary care thing right now, but it should be. It should be primary care.
Well, in summary for this episode, I think the three things that Tanya and I both agreed on is, first of all, supporting Canadian. This is a Canadian organisation, and supporting Canadian, I think, is really important. The other thing is that cortisol is part of our overall health. There are many things, as Tanya just said, that come into play for this, including the usual ones that we talk about, estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone too. And I think the other thing to acknowledge is that this is emerging technology. Before I met Tanya, I knew nothing about the area of what's called FemTech or wellness tech, and I'm learning so much more about it. And I think this is a very exciting area for us to be able to look at and also learn more about our own health too. So March will be menopause and hormone month for us. So look out for our episodes coming up in March. And again, we'll probably be talking a little bit more about the top three, the big three hitters, estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone. So we'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now. Talking Ovaries is here for information and empowerment, but not medical advice. We recommend discussing all aspects of your health with your healthcare provider. If you'd like to be part of Talking Ovaries, hit the like and subscribe button along with the notification bell. Or you can show us some love by writing us a review and sharing this episode with the people in your life. Talking Ovaries is written, created and produced by Tanya Lindsay and Judith Pringle. You can stay up to date with the Talking Ovaries by signing up for our newsletter and following us on Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn. We read every review and email. This material is protected by copyright.